games, we have the same elements, but they're structured in a much better way. So failure, for example, is expected and encouraged, because if you fail a bunch of times, that creates learning opportunities to improve yourself. Like things like obstacles, they're put there to add more fun. If you think about sports, for example, sports is a really good example of taking something that is at its core maybe not as interesting, like running, but then you add obstacles and limitations to it, like you say, you can only be in this space. And we add a ball, and you need to be with 11 people, there are all these restrictions, and all of a sudden you create sport. So you turn something that is maybe not very fun to continuously do, like run, and you turn it into a sport. So this is the magical thing about games. So work, the way it's designed, is designed for functionality and not for human beings. Games are mostly designed for fun. So what we do with gamification, we try to put that thing of fun into the functionality of reality. And that's the major challenge. So that brings us to the definition. So gamification is the use of game design thinking, but in a non-game environment. And it's also not the purpose to create a game, but it's the purpose to engage people, motivate action, and overcome problems by making people learn things. So inside gamification we have some sub-areas. So gamification is often used in the business context. We use a lot of social sciences, such as psychology and sociology, and we use design. So design is a process of really thinking about why something should work in a certain way. So related to that, it's about goals, or in the business environment, business goals. It's about things like performance and behavior. So behavior such as habits, performance as in this is what you're doing now and this is how you can improve. It's about motivation, and it's about using game design to solve problems. So there's one thing you want to follow is a design structure, and there are different ways to look at how to design gamification. Altu talked about the D6 model, which is created by Kevin Werbach and his partner. There's a course starting in December on Coursera. It's free. You should definitely check it out if you're interested. So I'll just go through the process. It starts with analysis. So what is the problem that I'm solving, and is it related to motivation? Is it related to engagement? What are the things that contribute to reaching your objectives? What are the behaviors? What are the actions and the goals? And then this is where the human element comes in. Why would someone want to do this? Why would someone want to get engaged? So this is really important to think about what drives someone to do something. And so this is where the psychology comes in. Then we design activity loops. So this is things like feedback systems, which are important. And so once you go through the analysis phase, that's when you get to the design part, and that's when you start developing your solution, and then you deploy it. So you're not done. This is where it starts, because gamification is about irrational behavior. It's about the things we might expect people to do, and then it turns out that they're doing something different. So you need to learn from the people who get involved in your environment, and then you iterate. So the last part, this is where a gamification solution starts going through a learning loop as a application owner, and you start to see, how can I improve this? For example, if this is learning, a learning environment, like say an online university, you try to figure out what can I improve so that people watch more videos, complete more courses, get higher grades. So you start playing around with the design. It's also about analytics. So it's not just adding a bunch of stuff to make it look more fun and engaging, but it's about measuring things. For example, for an online, for a website or an application, you would look at, for example, the R metrics. They're called the Pirate metrics, developed by Dave McClure. So it's, for example, about how do you, if you're a mobile application, let's say, how do you acquire a user, and then how do you activate them? So maybe you have a marketing campaign and people download your application, but then what? Like, how do you make them use the application? And then how do you make them come back? So if it's a software application, how do you make them use it once a week, once a day? So for example, with Fitwell, how do you make sure that people will use your application the way it's designed? How do you make people tell others about your application? And eventually, if you're running a business, how do you generate revenue? So the design is linked to these kind of metrics. Referrals goes back to acquisition. So activation, for example, this is in gamification we talk about onboarding. So it's how do we design so that you get comfortable using the application. Anyone who knows Excel or spreadsheet program, you know that there are like 40 functions or probably 400 functions. So you're confronted with a very complicated application, and you're not invited to get started and start using all these functions. So you could basically remove all the buttons, and you say there are 4 buttons. Let's start with button number 1, and then once you've used all these 4 buttons, you level up. You become level 2 in Excel, and we'll give you 8 more buttons. So slowly we invite you to go through the application, and you become an Excel guru at the end. So that would be an onboarding experience. Retention could be split in 2 ways. It's habit building or progression. So with Excel, it's about becoming better at what you're doing. Or if it's something like with health, fitness, finance, it's the habit of eating healthy, exercising, saving money. Referrals are things, how do you motivate people to share? Classical ways to motivate people to share is to give them something, but there are other tactics you can use for this. Revenue, that's just leveling up from being a user to becoming a customer. So gamification is a business solution. So it's not just to add fun. There's purpose why we want to engage people. Because if you have, let's say 100,000 users, you can split them into different levels of engagement. Let's say you have a news website, and some people come to your website once a month. If something happens, they go and they come to your website. So we would call them the low engaged users. And often this is the biggest group. So let's say they're 90%. Then we have a group which is, let's say, 9%. They're medium engaged. They come back every week, but they're not really loyal users. And then there's the high engaged and high value customers. They come every day, maybe more often. They are your truly loyal users. So if we attach a business value to this, let's say that the low engaged people are worth 5 lira per year. They look at your website, they see the banners, and over a year you earn 5 lira from them. Then there's a medium engaged group. Through them, because they come more often, you earn 50 lira. And then the high engaged group, through them, you earn 200 lira. So the goal of gamification, increased engagement, is to move people and say, oh, you're coming there once a month, and now I'm doing something, and by doing that you come back once a week. And if we increase that by 1%, then revenue goes up by 5%. If we increase it by 5%, revenue goes up by 20%. So although gamification is all about fun, it's serious business at the end. So just to give an example, if we're using these numbers and you have 100,000 customers, you would make a yearly revenue of 1.1 million lira. So if I increase engagement by 5%, you go from 1.1 to 1.36 million lira. So that's a big increase in revenue. So we know that there are, it's about behavior. So at the core, there's a single action. It's a click, it's a share, it's logging in, it's watching a video. It's often really difficult to motivate people to perform that single action. So what we do is we look at what this action belongs to, the task. So we can build up levels, and I'll show you an example later. And then, so what we try to do is we try to define the bigger context of these actions, so that we can motivate you in a more storytelling way. A level up would be a team task, and the biggest one is the ecosystem design. And however complex your engagement is, you always need to go down to the core level, the behavior. It's the click. You need to design towards that. But sometimes you want to expand your engagement and you want to work from the inside out. So an example, let's look at the old Foursquare. It's a very simple application. The goal is very simple. Single behavior, check-in. I want to motivate you to check in. So they count the check-ins and they give you a badge for that. But that is, if you imagine that if that would be the only thing, it would be very difficult to engage people over a longer period of time. So we don't only look at the single behavior, we look at the task, and that is checking in to become a mayor. So we're making it a little bit bigger. So now the first check-in has a meaning, but all the check-ins after have meaning too. Then we look at the role, and we can say there are different roles you can have within an application. So there's a role to become mayor. There might be a role to be an expert. So for that you want to rate bars or pizza places. And as a reward, you're recognized for your role, and you say, this guy knows all the best pizza places in Istanbul, he's the pizza guru. You can be a scout, so especially in the beginning at Foursquare, a lot of places didn't exist. So you can be rewarded for adding places. So again, it's a single behavior, but inside the context of something. And just like with my example with Foursquare, there might be the role of a newbie. So you don't know our application. Let me show you all the features that we have in our application, step by step. Then at a higher level, you can have team tasks. Foursquare doesn't really have this, but imagine that there's an Istanbul team, and you incentivize people to work together. So the mayor and the expert and the scouts, they work together so that the Istanbul identity, the Istanbul information is much richer than the information that is collected about Ankara. So you can create these competitions and you can bring people together. So that's thinking at a higher level, which brings you to the highest level. And basically, this is a human-centric approach, and you've figured out how you can motivate different people to work together, but also have personal motivators to get engaged, and not just once, but ongoing. Because what Foursquare could also have done is they could have hired people to find places and add them, but they decided that we can do that by outsourcing it to the people who use our application. Engagement, gamification, how you use it, you can use it in so many domains. So it could be enterprise, so how do I make my work more rewarding? How can I look at how I'm doing, how my performance is, and how can I improve this? You can use it in business to consumer context, like Foursquare. You can use it in business to business context. And in every space, you really need to start over and start figuring out what are the core drivers of motivation, what are the most important behaviors that I can stimulate that result in business success. And this makes the topic of the area of gamification complex. You don't always have to go through all the different layers. So maybe you just want to influence a profile completion, and all the other things are doing well. Then you don't have to add a whole gamified experience. You don't have to give badges and define roles and create teams. It really depends on like what the capacity is of engaging people in your experience. You can also make gamification very explicit or implicit. So LinkedIn, for example, uses a lot of tools that we would use in gamification. It tracks how many friends you have, which is not very relevant, but because now you can see another friend who has 500 friends and I only have 450 friends, maybe I should find more friends. How many people view your profile? It's not really that important, but because you show it and you compare it with others, all of a sudden you want to maybe improve how many people view your profile. So LinkedIn has leaderboards, they have feedback loops, they have triggers to get you engaged, you're bombarded with emails, please come back, come to our, read a blog post, maybe share something. So they have a lot of these triggers to engage you, so they're doing that really well. On the other side, there's an application called Zombie Run, and it's a fitness application, and basically what they do is they make you run against yourself, and they compare how you were running the day before or the last time you run, and if you run slower, then a zombie is catching you. So your personal best is a zombie which is chasing you. So it's something you hear on your headset and when you run with your phone, and so you need to improve yourself, otherwise the zombie is going to catch you. So that is a very game-like experience. Swarm is more in the middle. Duolingo is a really good example of not trying to make education too much into a game, but using the thing that we know in this particular kind of education, which is really important. So if you want to learn words, it's not about watching a really cool movie or playing a game, it's repeating. You need to repeat words over and over and over again. This is the best way to learn words. But that's also the most boring thing to do. You probably all use the flip cards, like you write one language on one side, the other language on the other side, and you just go through your flip card. It's really boring. But they've added some gamification elements to make that more fun. So it's a really good example of making something, keeping the core task very boring, but just adding something to it. So not forcing it to become a game, but just keeping it very efficient. So just to show LinkedIn, there's a ranking, which shouldn't be too relevant. So you can a lot of these things you can just remove, and LinkedIn will still do what it's supposed to do. But for some reason, profile strength, it shows your ranking. It gives you hints. If you want to improve your ranking, then you can do this and this. So all this information, these are tools from the toolbox of gamification. So one of the core elements is psychology, and I'm not going to go in too deep because it's a very wide domain, and there are a lot of schools, approaches to how you can describe how the mind works. But I'll stick with the two core ones that are essential to gamification. One is called behaviorism, and Alto already talked about Skinner box, the Pavlov dog. This is very much focused on habit building and conditioning, which is really essential because although gamification is about motivation, you cannot do something purely on motivation. At some point, motivation is this energy that you have. If imagine you would need to be motivated to get out of bed every morning, it would become a really hard task. And if you need to be motivated to eat, if you need to be motivated to all the things you do, then it becomes a really hard task. So if you can change these things that require motivation into a habit, then it doesn't require motivation anymore. So for a lot of things, it's really important to switch to habit building. And this is also one of the reasons why these diet programs do not work, because they're not focused on habit building, they're actually making you suffer for a long period, and then you switch back to your old habit. So the better diets are the ones that change your habit. Another theory, another school within psychology is called the self-determination theory. And this is all about intrinsic motivation. And this is the core power that we want to get to with gamification. It's not easy to access intrinsic motivation, but if you can get there, that would be the most powerful accomplishment. So anyone who learned a bit about psychology will know that there's intrinsic motivation and there's extrinsic motivation. Intrinsic motivation is I'm doing something because I love doing it. And this, if you're lucky, this is your job. If you're unlucky, you do it for something else, which could be your salary. So that's intrinsic motivation. You do something in order to get something else. So we have motivation, and like we said, gamification is about behavior, it's about action. Motivation starts at the beginning, is the thing that leads to an action, and then rewarding is the thing that follows. If you can focus on going from rewarding to motivation, and especially intrinsic motivation, then you can tap into very powerful things, and you can accomplish things like Wikipedia, where no one is really rewarded to contribute to Wikipedia. But people are really motivated to write articles and protect the quality of the content on Wikipedia. Rewarding, we know in work, in life, about getting things, a salary, a bonus, but it's a wider spectrum than that. This is by Gabe Zickerman, one of the gamification gurus who's probably still in Istanbul today. He was here yesterday and 2 days before. He calls it SAPS. It's status, access, power, and stuff. Stuff, we know, it's the thing you get. But power is something that you get, but it's not really tangible. For example, if you're on a forum, you become the moderator, and you have the power to approve comments, to kick out people. So people want to get to that level, so you can reward them with that. Access, we know this from airline programs. You have access to the VIP lounge because you fly with us a lot. You get this many points. You level up. Now you have access to the VIP lounge, and similar to that, you get status. Now you are a frequent flyer, and you can check in with this desk, and all the normal people, the common people, need to check in here. Same desk, probably the same level person working there, but you can walk on the red carpet, and the other people just need to stand in line. So it's this thing that people aspire to achieve. A couple things about behavior which are really important to understand. Behavior can be split in these three groups. It's important that the behavior is valuable. If you're talking about a business context, then you want to motivate an employee or a customer to do something that is meaningful. So you can engage people with an Xbox in the lunchroom, but getting engaged in the lunchroom and playing games doesn't help them do their job better. So whatever you motivate them to do, it needs to have value, but it also needs to have value for the user, for the employee, for the customer, or for you as an individual. The behavior needs to be feasible, so you need to be able to do it. It shouldn't be too hard, and the behavior needs to be desired, so you need to want to do it. And this is one of the things that we try to focus on with gamification. We try to make you want to do it. So instead of all the tasks that you have to do, if we can reposition it and it becomes something we want to do, then it's, we touch the intrinsic motivation. So desired behavior is our domain. That's where design comes in. The valuable behavior, that's, how does the system work? What's the value behind it? Feasible is the thing you develop. It's the app, it's the website, it's the tool that you can use. Our focus is mostly on desired behavior. And really important is about a win-win situation. So if the win-win situation, so if you're a company and your customers, if your win-win situation is long, so it's the reason why the customer wants to continue to do something, if it keeps adding value to the customer, then you can have a long-lasting relationship. If you are doing something that doesn't create a long-term win-win situation, then your system will not survive. So this is the second. So we have behaviorism. This is the self-determination theory. These are three really important elements. And if you think about your job, if you can find this in your job, then you are really lucky. So autonomy is the ability to decide how you do your job. It's the opposite of micromanagement. So anyone who knows, has experienced a micromanager, is someone who says exactly what to do. You need to do this, like this, buy that, and you're sort of like a slave, and you don't feel, you cannot take any pride in your work. It's sort of like, imagine that you want to paint, and I'm going to tell you which colors to use, how to paint it, and then you don't feel proud about the painting you made because someone told you how to do it, and so you didn't have any freedom. Purpose is really important, so it needs to have meaning. It's if you can find purpose in something, this is like a really powerful element for motivation. And mastery is also really important. So if the thing you do helps you to become better, this is really, really powerful. Another concept from game design is designing the challenge. So if something is too difficult, it becomes frustrating, so you get stressed. If something is too easy, you get bored. And this is different from person to person. So ultimately, if you design something, you want to make sure that the individual gets into this sense of flow. So this is a part where you completely forget time. So anyone who has played games, which it could be a really truly immersive game, like a shooter game, or something like Candy Crush. If you lose track of time, then that means you got into your state of flow. So you didn't experience a lot of stress. You also didn't feel bored. That's a really powerful design approach. So this is all about how the engine of engagement works, and it has a lot of complex components. On the other side, there is the usability and the valuable information. So it's something like, what do you show on a dashboard? So imagine that you want to motivate people to run, to play sports more often. Then you start thinking about, like, what information do I show? Sometimes you don't need to focus on this complex engine. It's just providing feedback that is important. A lot of things we do in life, it's like driving a car without understanding how fast you drive. So you have no idea if you're driving too slow, too fast. You don't know how much gas you use. Just providing feedback would already do a lot. And this is, for example, with like how many calories you eat, how much you walk. This is where technology comes in really handy now. We are able to track so much information now that just giving access to information already creates motivation to improve. That's my part of the presentation. I would definitely recommend to take the Coursera course if you're interested. Feel free to contact me if you have any questions. buy the book if you're interested to learn about gamification and you want to focus on the Turkish source. And I think we can take a break now before Akar is going to tell you more about gamification and UX design. Thank you.
3'e kadar bir ara vereceğiz. 3'e kadar bir ara vereceğiz, sonra Akar başlayacak.